hot under these lights.
You've been live for 5 minutes.
We better go.
Oh, we're good. Hey, welcome to Recovery at the Rock. We are going to talk about the G word tonight. So I'm Cindy, a grateful believer in Jesus. By the way, the G word is grief. And I struggle with grief. I've got two amazing people here with me tonight, and they're going to share some experiences with you guys too, and so they're going to introduce themselves.
My name is Victoria. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus, and I've struggled with depression, anxiety, and divorce.
My name is Jimmy. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ, and I don't know what the technical terms are, but I struggle with self-dependence and I would say grief too.
Yeah, I think that that's one of the things that happens. You know, grief is something that a lot of people don't really think about until they experience it. And then it's not something in our culture that like is talked about very much. And so sometimes even when you're experiencing it, you don't know how to label it, right? Like, I don't know what this is, but I know it doesn't feel right and it doesn't feel good. Do you want to talk real quick about like your experience with grief, like why you're up here on the panel?
Sure, yeah. Well, a couple of things just really neat that the Lord has been doing in my life recently is I felt like God's just been calling me to do more. I've been seeking out accountability in my life to kind of step out of my comfort zone and do some things. And I've been seeking God to just say, I don't want to just keep doing the normal things. And you all know what I mean when you're just in the routine. And I was just asking God to do some stuff. And there was a Sunday night prayer, and I was sitting right there on that front row. And I felt like this is Sunday night prayer, had nothing to do with Celebrate Recovery. And I felt like the Lord said, Jimmy, you need to get involved in Celebrate Recovery and lead some worship sometimes. And I brushed it off. And when I got back to my office after prayer was over, I had a text message from Kayla Mayfield who said, hey, do you want to lead worship at CR one week? And so I was like, okay, Lord, I'll step out. And so that's how I got here tonight. And then this wonderful lady asked me the other day, she said, hey, do you want to be on this panel about grief? And I don't know how she would even know this, but the Lord had been working on my heart a couple months ago about dealing with the death of my father, who died over 10 years ago. And I just out of nowhere, and I say out of nowhere, but the Lord guides our steps, right? And so he said, I felt like the Lord was putting on my heart to reach out to my sister who has struggled with my father's death a lot more than I have, or at least that's what I thought. And so I said, hey, Patty, why don't we talk some about Dad? And I know that that's uncomfortable for you. I know he was harder on you than he was on me, but I feel like we need to talk about it. And then so that got us to here tonight, where I said, okay, Lord, you must have a purpose for me to be at Celebrate Recovery tonight. So I'll say yes.
Hey, Victoria.
Well, I've experienced grief in my life. I've lost both of my parents, and I had a son that was stillborn at 38 weeks. I've also experienced grief over the loss of my marriage, and I kind of told you guys yesterday, you know, you said, well, don't share what you're not comfortable sharing, and I want my life to be an open book. I don't want any of the pain that I've experienced to be for nothing. And so if there's something that I can share that someone can relate to and it can help them come out of that place of grief or of just being down, then I want to be that. Like, I want to be that hope.
That's awesome. And so for me, I too I've struggled with a couple of different types of grief. We're going to talk about some of those. Like, I think a lot of times people get kind of confused about that feeling and that word. But Reggie and I have struggled with the grief of, I guess, loss of some things. When he went through addiction, there were some things that, like opportunities that we lost. We wanted to do foster care, and you can't do that with a felony. And so we kind of grieved that. I lost a job in 2018 that I grieved over. And then in October of last year, I lost my cousin. He's kind of like my brother. And so that has been probably the hardest thing, I guess, that I've ever experienced in my whole life. And it kind of led me on a grief path where I wanted to share with other people, because I know that if I've never experienced, I had experienced sadness before, and even when I look back and I think about like losing my job and us grieving over different things, like I've never felt like I felt when we lost Dave. And so I know that if I'm hurting, there has to be other people that are hurting. We talked some yesterday about grief shaming. Have you ever had grief shaming, do you feel like?
I think as a guy, I have dealt with, maybe I hadn't ever had anybody tell me to just get over it, but I had more of an internal shaming where I felt like I had to be over it, if that makes sense. So I had to just move on. We had the funeral, it was done. My dad died in Florida, so we went down, had the funeral. In my mind, when I stepped on the plane to come home, that was it, you know? And but I have very, very conflicting memories with my dad. It was not good. So it wasn't all bad, I'll say that, but I can't look back and say that I have all these amazing memories with my dad. So for me, I just wanted to move on and put all that stuff behind me and not think about it, not deal with that. I wanted to be the opposite of him, I guess you could say. So for me, the shaming was just like, Jimmy, just, okay, it's over, it's done with. And that was 10 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. What about you, Victoria? Have you had any grief shaming?
Yes, and I think that in the moment I didn't realize what it was. It was just like, well, maybe they have a point. But I remember after my son passed away, a lot of people, I'm sure with good intentions, said, well, at least you've got Christian. Or don't worry, you can have more kids. And that was really not what I wanted or needed to hear at that point. And you know, now I realize it to be grief shaming, but yes, I have experienced that.
Yeah. So the main point kind of in talking about grief shaming and kind of what that is just to realize that, you know, in those moments, people are grieving. It's better just to be there for them and realize that, just like Victoria said, she didn't even realize it was happening at the moment. And so probably those people did have good intentions. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's so like obscure to talk about death and to talk about grief that like people literally have no idea what to say. And so, you know, for people that are trying to help people that are going through a season of grief or a forever of grief, depending on how that is, like just be there for them. And then if you are going through grief, realize that a lot of times people really have good intentions, but they don't know what to say to you.
And I think that too, something really good is remember to validate that person's feelings. You know, you don't have to understand why they feel the way that they do, but just saying, you know, that you understand that they're feeling that way, and you know, you're there to help them, or you're there to just support them in whatever way that you can. But when you start telling them, oh, we'll move on, it's okay, there's, you know, better days ahead, that's not really what they want to hear in that moment.
It's not. And it's so hard because as a Christian, I think that a lot of times that's what you're like trying to do. Like, oh, well, the Lord's got it, and He's going to...
Joy comes in the morning.
Right? And so those are great things, but man, sometimes they really hurt.
They do.
Okay, so our big meat for tonight is understanding our 6 needs of mourning. So I worked in mental health for 10 years, and I never thought that I would need mental health. Isn't that such a weird thing? Like, I can remember, like, when I started, well, actually, someone reached out to me. I'm going to call out Adam Rigney and say that he messaged me and said, you might need to see a grief counselor. And I was like, maybe, but, you know, I think I've got it. And then the next day, I was like, I think I need to see a grief counselor. And so I messaged him, and I was like, thank you for reaching out to me and telling me that I need to do that, because I do need to do that. But even though I knew what it was and I knew that I should probably do it, like, until someone else said, I recognize this, like, I wouldn't have done it. And so I started grief counseling, and my amazing therapist, introduced me to the 6 needs of mourning. So we're going to talk about those. Victoria, would you like to say something? You look excited to like talk. I thought you had something like super cool to say. Okay, so Shelley Dane posted the other day on Facebook, and I saw her say something about grief being an extension of love, and I think it's really cool because in the book that has the 6 needs of mourning, it says there's only one happiness in life: to love and to be loved. Wow. And it really is like when you love, you grieve. You grieve that loss or that separation. And so one of the things that I've learned is that no matter who we are, a child, a teenager, an adult, we have 6 central needs, or kind of like yield signs, that help us when someone dies. So there are lots of different forms of grief, but we are primarily going to talk about death tonight. Sometimes you can work on more than one of these at a time, but we're going to step through them, and I'm going to ask y'all some questions, some probing, deep questions. So our first need is we need to accept the reality of the death. It's really hard sometimes to accept that someone that you love has died and that they're never going to come back. I know it can take weeks, it can take months, it can take years, as you said, to accept the fact that this person's gone. But it's important for us to realize that that's normal. It's normal for it to take a long time. Sometimes we know it in our head, but then our heart doesn't really feel it. We were at the graveyard the other day. I don't normally call it that. I call it Dave's place because that word is really hard for me. But Carly, my daughter, she said, "This is so weird, Mom. Like, I just expect him to come walking up." And like, we know in our head that he's not going to, but in our heart, like, it still feels like he should meander on up there. And so I have to realize that it's okay for it to take me a long time. It's okay for me to want to push that aside sometimes and think, well, I'll see him later, because I know that ultimately I will see him later. Do you think that time is playing a part in your healing, Jimmy?
For me, accepting the reality of the death was difficult because things were not right with my dad. I grew up, thankfully, the Lord saved me at a young age, and I grew up in church. And so my entire childhood was praying for my father, believing that things would change, believing that he would be different, believing that, like this idea of a dad, what a dad should be, praying my whole life that would be a turnaround. I'd see that. And so for me, when my mom called me and said, "Your dad has died," it was such a like a slammed book closed on every prayer that I had ever prayed, because I knew it was over, So for me, I struggled for a long time. And I guess now that we're even up here talking, just the idea of grieving the loss of not having a father that I always prayed for. And so time has helped me with that. Having my own kids has helped me with that, to figure out that I don't need that. I found a lot in my life where I went to seek that out in other people, to find men that I could look up to. Who was I going to be? How was I going to be tough? How was I going to? And I think that's part of the reason that I told you at the beginning that I struggle with self-dependency, is I learned how to just take care of myself, how to do things on my own. And so accepting the reality of the death was even more than just knowing that he's not coming back, but it was knowing that I would never have that role in my life that I prayed for.
I feel like we have a lot in common, but I've told you before, my dad was very abusive to my mother and my sisters and I when we were growing up, and we moved away when I was about 7 years old. And I had told myself my whole life that when I found out my dad was gone, I wouldn't care, that, just be one thing I could close the book on and it'd be that. And I remember when I got the phone call that he'd passed away, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I realize now, especially after going through step study and working through all the things that I needed to work through, that it's okay and I can still forgive him for me. But it was just the finality of knowing that now we'll never be able to, face to face make amends or build some kind of new relationship or anything like that. So I think the initial acceptance of it was really hard. It was a really tough pill to swallow, but I think that over time, and again, like I said, working through step study and all of the feelings that I had suppressed, I'm at peace with it now.
Yeah, that's awesome. So our second need is let yourself feel the pain of the loss. My therapist likes to say, you need to feel it before you can heal it, which I like because it rhymes, and I like things that rhyme. So it is easier to avoid or repress those feelings, deny that stuff, and push it away. But the problem is that if we don't confront it, then we're never really going to tame it. It'll always kind of lurk like in your heart or in your soul. But sometimes we have to dose ourselves with it. Like we can't feel everything at once. So Jimmy, where do you see yourself in feeling the pain of your loss?
I told you I reached out to my sister and I talked to her, and she's dealt with it a lot, and she's talked about things with me before, and I've just kind of pushed it aside because I didn't really want to. I'm let's have a good time, let's be happy, let's move on. I don't want to bring down the mood, self-dependence, where I don't want to even bear what I'm going through with other people, because I want us all to be happy. And so for me, letting me feel the pain of the loss was literally telling my sister what it was like for us as a kid. Like, we had to talk about what we went through, and she was so thankful for that, because she said, I'm so glad you said that, because sometimes I think I'm crazy. Did we really go through that? Was it really like that? And so we had to actually just talk back and forth, and we did it on Facebook. Actually, I text a lot of this stuff because I just didn't really even want to hold a phone to my ear and have to talk through all this stuff, so I just typed, but we did. We talked a lot about that, but that was letting myself feel the pain of kind of what we went through. And I know that this is a little different than exactly, but part of the grief for me was re-experiencing some of the things that we had talked about and what you'd gone through. So, yeah, so it's not fun.
No, for sure not, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I'm a huge advocate for 12-step. Like, I feel like if it hadn't have been for going through step study, I would not have fully dealt with the things that I've dealt with the loss of my dad, my parents both. But I think the loss of my dad was the most recent, and it was the one that was like the most deep hurt. So I think that now I'm at a place where I'm at peace with it, but I think it's only because of going to step study and digging up that root and all of the stuff that came with it, and allowing myself to feel how I felt until I felt peace.
Yeah. So with me, I'm still letting myself feel the pain of our loss. I struggle immensely. I talk about it like every week in small group and every day. I teach about it on Thursdays, and like it is, I don't know. I miss him tremendously. So I don't know. I think I feel it a lot. So, okay.
Still so new.
It is. It's 4 months, but still, like, I don't know. Okay, so our number 3 need is remembering the person who died. I rock at this. When someone you love dies, that person lives on through you in memory. And so to reconcile your loss, you have to actively remember the person who died and commemorate their life. When you love someone enough to remember them with other people, there's something about it. So it's really a good thing to keep talking about them. Sometimes you don't want to, and sometimes you don't want to relive that stuff, and that's okay. But looking for good memories, like it just helps. Like it helps healing. It helps you. Like I love that you said that, like, you know what you want to do and you don't want to do with your boys, because I think that's just so important. So, some examples of things that you can do to keep memories alive are talking to friends, or making a memory book or a memory box. I have some amazing friends that took David's flowers and made me like this little cross, and they have his little flowers in there. And did you do anything with any of your dad's things, or?
I did. I remember my dad used to love Jimmy Stewart, and he was a big fan of him. So we watched those movies all the time. That was pretty much the only thing he liked to watch. So I remember some Christmas back in the day, I gave my dad a picture of Jimmy Stewart. It was from the Harvey movie. And that was one of the items that I kept from my dad, and I keep it upstairs in my little room that I have, and I look at it and I tell my boys about it, and so I do think that I think that is very important, is to look, even if there are bad memories, for you to still look back and say, and this is through the grace of the Lord on my life, to know that I'm a sinner and I make mistakes and I am not perfect either. So I look back on my dad and I say, I know that he was not perfect, and my dad struggled with, he was bipolar, manic depressive, and so he had a lot of swings and stuff, and but I look back and I could still see those moments that shine through that were good, and so I keep that picture in my room, and I think about him a lot. So
Yeah, that's awesome.
So I don't have any physical memories of my dad or anything like that, but with my son who passed away, I had a car decal made, and it's on the back of one of our vehicles. My son drives now, so he's now driving that vehicle. But that, and we've recently moved into a new house, and we've thrown around some ideas of a memory shelf, or something that we can dedicate just to my baby.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's so awesome. So even in the books that talk about this, it talks about that some memories are not pleasant, and we know that can be hard. And so do you have people, Jimmy, that you can talk to? I know you can talk to Patty. Is there anybody else that you share those hard times with? We're not all perfect, right? So I'm not trying to act like I've got this all together, but no, I don't think so. My wife is amazing, and she will listen and talk, but it goes back to that thing in me. That's something I'll have to work on. I'll have to work on this idea of wanting to talk about it, and voicing that, because that's not a thing I'm used to. I don't have a venue to do that. I don't have a normal time to bring those things up. So Mondays at 6:30, The
Yes.
Rock.
Small groups. Small group step study.
Yes, but so those are the things I would be looking for, and I don't know, maybe just to throw this in there for the other guys that are in the room, I think real friendships in your life come from when people will ask you things that are even awkward or difficult or hard, and you might not know how to ever bring that. How would I ever bring up to one of my friends, hey, how you doing with this thing? But that question alone, would just open a door, and maybe that's the opportunity that a guy like me is waiting on, is for somebody to just say that, and then all of a sudden I can put that out there.
Right. Yeah. I know with Kenny Lee, my little cousin David's little brother, we have had very different experiences in the loss of David, and in the loss of his dad. His dad passed away 4 years ago, and so I challenge him, probably more than he wants to be challenged, to remember good times, and not that he's negative or anything like that, but he has more negative memories than I do, because I'm positive. Not to talk about your sister, but Patty. I'm positive Patty's sitting over here, trying to make everything good and remember all the good times and all the times we laughed and stuff. And he's like, well, what about the time? And I'm like, okay, well, what about that? Okay, so need number 4 is that we have to develop a new self-identity. I know we talked about this the other day, and this is something that before counseling I never thought of. I didn't think about needing to find a new role, but it's so true. So an example of this is let's say that your best friend is Mary, and Mary passes away. So when you introduce yourself to people, like you probably used to say, like, oh, I'm Mary's best friend, but now you're not Mary's best friends anymore, or you feel like you're not Mary's best friend anymore. And so other people thought of you, like they probably said, like, oh, well, that's Victoria, she's Mary's best friend. And so you have this new life. I was talking to y'all about us the other day, like I've always been the middle child. And so David was the oldest. Victoria didn't know that. She thought Kenny Lee was the oldest, but David was the oldest, and then me, and then Kenny Lee. And I've always been in the middle of them. And so for the last 4 months, like, I'm not in the middle anymore. And I still find myself putting myself in the middle. So I will, like Kenny Lee will say something and I'm like, oh, well, think about it this way. David did blah, blah, blah. And like, it's unimportant. I don't have to be the middle person anymore, but I still slide myself in as the middle person. Being the oldest, like that's a lot of pressure. I don't want to be the oldest, but I have to. So I have to find myself in a new role. So Jimmy, we know that the person who played in your life was your dad, but what identity changes like have you made in the loss of your dad?
Part of that was in my coping mechanism to just instantly, but I'd kind of grown up already kind of without that need for, I wasn't holding on to that as, oh man, I need my dad in my life. So I had kind of moved on that before he even died, I guess. And so, but I still think that self-identity that I did struggle with was trying to say, okay, God, if I don't see that role on earth, what am I supposed to be as a father? And so seeking God and seeking the roles of other men in my life that were serving the Lord and living right. So I had to develop that kind of an idea of what does God want me to be as a dad.
Yeah. Yeah, that's,
Okay, so I know that we were trying to stick with grief as it relates to death, but I think that the biggest identity shift that I had was grieving the loss of my divorce, because I went from being this person's wife to now I'm a divorced woman at the church. And, I just felt like I had this scarlet letter on me. And in hindsight, I know that that was poor thinking on my part, but I think that learning who I am in Christ and learning that I am my own person and learning that my worth does not depend on somebody's inability to see, my value. I just think that that was one of the biggest life lessons that I've ever learned.
Yeah.
So that's mine.
That's real good. That's good stuff. And I think a lot of people have had that exact experience and need to hear that. Okay, so need number 5 is search for meaning. A lot of times when we have a loss, we naturally question what is the purpose of this? Like, why do people die? Why did this person have to die? We talked not long ago in CR about the only ifs. So, if only, was it only ifs or if onlys? I don't know.
It works both ways.
Okay, well, the if onlys. If only we had gotten there faster, would he still be here and that kind of stuff. And so, it's okay to ask questions. I think that's really important to say. It's okay to search for meaning and to wonder why things happen. Jimmy, did you experience some searching for meaning?
I think it changes over time, maybe. I think when it first happened, sure, I'm like looking for instantaneous answers. God, why didn't you answer my prayers? God, why? A lot of soul searching in that. In my life, where I'm saying, God, I prayed for this for all these years and nothing ever happened. So where are you at in this? And so I'm searching for meaning in those kinds of ways. But then, God, what is it that I think where I turn to is, God, maybe I'm not going to understand why I went through this, but God, what could you do in me through this? If that makes sense. That here I am on the other side of this now, and I might not fully understand why I went through the things that I went through, but God, could you make something good come out of it, like what you said? And if that's the case, then I'm going to start searching for that. And of course, I threw myself all into loving my kids and just trying to be the best dad that I could be for them. And I'm sure, to a fault, I'm sure, but, you know, we'll figure that out too.
Yeah.
I struggled with a lot of only ifs when my son passed away. Only if I had went to the hospital sooner. Only if I had, you know, done more yoga. I don't know. But, you know, and then I also struggled a lot with why did you let this happen, Lord? You know, you see on the news every day people who don't want their children and all these bad things that happen. And I wanted my baby, you know, and he was gone. And I think that it wasn't, I saw it as a punishment in the beginning. You know, I must have done something. And it just took me, actually read this book. It's called I'll Hold You in Heaven. And it's about miscarriage and stillbirth and things like that. And it was very eye-opening. You know, maybe the purpose for your pain was not as a punishment to you, but so that you can be a vessel through which the Lord helps somebody else. And just knowing that, you know, I have this story that can help somebody, and I don't know how other people that are going through that feel, but I can relate. And I think that that's the biggest thing to somebody who's going through a situation like that, is just having somebody that can relate to how they feel. And so I'm still learning that, you know, there's the meaning, and it's not a negative meaning. It's not a punishment meaning, but it's something that God is going to use for his glory. You know, and just like the Bible says, what the enemy meant for evil, the Lord's going to use it for good.
That's
like
good
he's
stuff.
I'm
that's
glad
good
that I'm here and that I'm able to share.
Yeah, that's awesome. With us, a lot of the things that you said, Jimmy, are the same for us. Like Reggie and I, for the last 4 years, have lived and breathed recovery. And so David struggled with addiction, and on October 4th, that book slammed shut. And so all of those prayers, all of those victories that we had seen before, like, they came to a little bit of a screeching halt. And that screech was the loudest screech I think I've ever heard in my life. And so I totally understand what you're saying, and our meaning has been to use his story to help others that are hurting. So number 6 is let others help you now and always. Grief is not an on your own experience. It's probably the hardest work that anyone ever has to do, and you just can't do it by yourself. I know a lot of people do journaling in grief, and journaling is amazing, but having someone to talk to, having someone beside you to say, don't beat yourself up about that.
To hug you when you don't want to be hugged.
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not a hugger, I can't help it. We are kind of out of time, so I'm going to kind of wrap up. But you are so welcome on Monday nights here at The Rock.
Keep coming back.
Keep coming back. Our text from tonight came from 2 books, Healing Your Grieving Heart for Teens, because I guess my therapist thinks that I'm much like a teenager. And I am. And The Wilderness of Grief, Finding Your Way. I want to put a plug in for the NEA Center for Good Grief. Their phone number is 870-936-7719. And they have amazing therapists that are there for you. They have individual grief counseling. They have support groups. There are camps. There's grief workshops. There's so much that they provide, and they're just amazing. Katrina is actually the one that she got me connected with my therapist, and Anna Page is amazing. It's just, I love getting to talk to her, and so, I mean, even if you don't have anything that you think that you're grieving over, call them. They're so cool.
I just want to reiterate something that you said and that we talked about yesterday. You know, God did not intend for us to do life alone. And that's not just for sharing the good times and sharing the joy. Even whenever we're going through grief or times of sadness or hardship, like, get your people around you. Don't do it alone. You cannot do it by yourself.
That's good.
Got any closing statements?
No, God is good.
All the
All the
time.
All the time.
God is good. Okay, so Jeff, where are you? Hey, Jeff. You're up.
We're done.